This is Monocle on Design, a show where we discuss everything from architecture and craft to furniture and fashion. I'm Nick Manise. On today's program, we recap the Monocle Quality of Life conference, which has just wrapped up in Istanbul. We'll hear from leading architects, urbanists and fashion designers who joined us at the event. All that coming up on Monocle on Design. Hello and welcome to today's show. Hosted by Monocle's editors, the Monocle Quality of Life conference wrapped up in Istanbul on Saturday after 3 days of lively discussion and debate. And I'm going to be doing a little bit of a recap from the rooftop of the Peninsula Hotel with Natalie Theodosi, our fashion director. Natalie, welcome.
Thank you very much.
So over the next 30 minutes, Natalie, we're going to go back into some of the panels, some of the highlights from, some of the talks and discussions that we hosted and we chaired. Obviously, just covering design, architecture, urbanism, my loves, the topics I love to unpack. But there was also a little bit of fashion as well. And maybe that's a nice place to start, because we co-hosted a panel called Made in Turkey. Tell us a little bit about that, who we had on, what we talked about.
No, there was some great fashion as well, and we always speak on this show about sort of the crossovers of fashion and design, so I thought it was great that we were finally able to bring it alive with a live panel at our conference. And we spoke to Nackiyé, which is one of the most interesting brands here in Istanbul, who spoke about building a brand that really emphasizes their geography. These are designers who are taking inspiration from their Ottoman heritage. They're working with local artisans and creating a product that's really unique and really representative of modern Turkish design.
And they're an amazing fashion label run by two sisters who co-founded it, Başak and Defne. They were also joined on stage by an architect, a designer I really admire, Seyhan Özdemir Sapa, who is the co-founder of Autoban.
And they're friends as well.
They are friends. And in fact, Autoban designed their studio. But I think it's best to maybe, we've already kind of had this brilliant discussion with them. Why don't we dive straight into it now?
It's so interesting that you're both setting up ateliers in Turkey and working with all these incredible craftsmen. There is a perception around Turkish manufacturing, but you are trying to change it, finding the right people to work with and really celebrating local craft. How have you gone about setting up those ateliers and finding the right teams to manufacture your products and also to create your projects?
This is a very interesting geography. Painting and sculpture didn't develop in this geography in the Western sense because of religious reasons and the reasons around that. But rather, architecture, ceramics, miniature, calligraphy, carpet making did. This geography has a very distinguished style. It's so distinguished that Byzantine churches and Ottoman mosques have more in common than churches and mosques do. So it's so distinct. And why is it distinct? It's because of the ustalar. Ustalar meaning masters, the craftspeople. This geography actually has been a melting pot for masters from the Balkans, Iran, the Caucasia region like Georgia and Azerbaijan and Armenia. And this is a treasure we wanted to build our brand on. And that's particularly why we actually relocated to Istanbul from London, because we thought, okay, this is what we have.
Drawing inspiration, where do you pull from? Where are your cultural cues for the work that you're doing?
For fashion, people look up to the West because you take cues from the Western aesthetics, and that's traditionally how you do it. We chose to do it the other direction. We wanted to take subtle inspiration from the Turkish and Ottoman aesthetics, colors, textures, which actually has inspired the West during the 17th and 18th century massively. That's our only story. This is the only story we could tell, and we come from quite an interesting family. We come from a Sufi tradition. Our family actually belongs to a 14th century Sufi lodge. The first and only woman dervish to whirl was our great-grandmother. It's a very women-strong family, and Sufi people are quite good with arts and crafts and music. It's very important to them. We just had nothing else but this culture and this tradition to work with. That's why we're here.
And what's really interesting is that you all highlight your geography through your work. But Han, you were telling us that you're also interested in looking at the more modern history of the Turkish Republic, specifically the last 100 years. How does that come out in your work, and why do you find that as an important source of inspiration?
When we talk about Istanbul and Turkey, people from outside of Turkey, they just remember the Ottoman Empire and its history. As a contemporary designer from Turkey, working internationally, so we have also our past 100 years as a Turkish Republic. We have an amazing architects, amazing artists here in Turkey, like Serhat Hakkı Eldem and also one of our legend architects, Serhat Hakkı Eldem, during 50s. They both together supported contemporary design. And also, I should mention İlhan Koman. Since we were born here, raised up here in Turkey, working internationally, it's a privilege to work in that kind of iconic projects here in Turkey, supported by an amazing architects and designers, artists. I think we should combine our past. I mean, our past means from Byzantine is 1,000 years old. Not only Ottoman period, from Byzantine to Ottoman to the last period of ours as the Turkish Republic. There are an amazing inspirational people and works from our even last 100 years old.
How do you export that internationally and make it feel relevant?
It's just blending what you have with what you think is valid for the others. That's pretty much what we try to do. To try to stay original as possible and to go back to your childhood and dig what you have and then try to offer it in the best, most sincere way.
I think it's personality and the background together. We merge our background and also how we educated and what we are learning during the daytime. But also Istanbul is a layer by layer city. It's an amazing inspiration for us. We always want to take this another level, for a contemporary level, create an additional value for all of us.
That was Bashak and Daphne, co-founders of Nackiyé, and Seyhan, co-founder of Autoban. We'll be right back after this.
How long do you think it would take you to travel the world to hear from the most perceptive and relevant speakers on the global news agenda? To mix that up with a trip to visit the business people benchmarking best practice in media, retail and hospitality. And to make time too, to delve into a rich mix of great design stories and rich cultural discoveries. Well, you can do all of this in just 60 minutes each week by tuning in to The Curator, a whistle-stop tour of the best of the last 7 days on Monocle Radio. Subscribe and download the show now or listen every weekend on Monocle Radio.
So Natalie, we're still in Istanbul, still on the rooftop of the Peninsula Hotel. Now, I kind of want to dive into possibly my favourite chat of the day. It was with Richard England, who's this amazing Maltese architect, who I was lucky enough to cover for Monocle magazine as well. There's an exceptionally photographed story by Andrea Pugiotto in our current October issue of the magazine. But he's essentially gone on to define, I guess, the architecture of his native Malta. You've seen some images of it. What's your immediate impression?
I have to give you credit that you did an incredible job with that story. It's one of our most visually interesting stories. So I thought it was great that you also brought him on to Istanbul and got to tell his story live on stage.
Because I think that's what's so amazing about him. He's got this amazing kind of geometric architecture that plays with light and shadow. It's colourful, it's dynamic, but he's also kind of had this incredible 6-decade career, which has involved working with, he started out working with the Italian mid-century master Gio Ponti. He developed master plans for Baghdad in the 1980s, which was a very difficult place to work, and navigated the politics of Kazakhstani architecture competitions, which, again, not an easy thing to do. So not only did we talk about his architecture, but we also heard a little bit about his life and career. So let's go to that conversation with Richard England now.
I can't stop myself growing old, but I struggle desperately to keep myself young and to stop myself growing in terms of not age, but enthusiasm, curiosity. It always reminds me of the words of the author of the Never-Ending Story, Michael Ende, who said, "Man dies when the last part of the child in him becomes an adult." So I struggled to keep young, but, you know, when you get to my age, it's like a little bit of being an old building. You need maintenance. So, and you also get privileges. I mean, I got a chair, which I see the other speakers have had to stand. So there are plus marks. And now about poetry. You know, the pen is, in a way, the tongue of the mind in terms of poetry and prose. In drawing, the pen is, in a way, the eye and the hand. Now, poetry is not that different from architecture. It's about building. You're building with words, and you're choosing a particular lexicon. In architecture, you're building with materials, and you have to choose those materials. But they're both about, one is about sound and silence, and the other is about solid and void. So there is a great similarity. In terms of drawing, I have a great preference for drawing as opposed to taking photographs. In a way, drawing is a meditation.
We've got some architects in the crowd as well, but plenty of people that aren't architects. Is there a benefit to drawing even if you're not a designer?
Look, the sketch gives you something which the computer can never give you, because the sketch can actually take you to places which you haven't even imagined. The hand it's a thinking hand, and what you put down on paper in the concept drawings is about what you are going to build. The actual construction drawings will tell you how to build. So there is a sort of bridge.
So it's almost like it's capturing an atmosphere or an energy.
Well, atmosphere is actually very important. I think one of the most important qualities in terms of an architecture is that the architecture belongs to a place. Man is an evolutionary animal, and we need to be able to create an architecture which somehow or other belongs both to its time but also to its place. I had believed in the early stages in the words of the composer Bela Bartok, who had said, "What is new and significant must of reality be founded on tradition." Tradition teaches you a lot of things. The vernacular architecture of Malta has a wonderful way of maximum utilization of minimal resources, sustainability, relationship to the earth. So these are lessons which we really need to almost relearn. So in a way, while we have still so much to actually learn, we may perhaps have even more to remember.
Learning's probably a great jumping off point. If we kind of go back to the start of your career, you worked with Gio Ponti. Incredible, absolutely blows my mind. This mid-century master that we all revere, we talk about all the time. And yet your work feels very different to his. Is that the context piece coming into play?
To go back to the tradition, it was William Blake who said, "We become what we behold." But apart from what you assimilate, you also then need what I would call an intellectual overlay. And I got that intellectual overlay from a number of people. Initially, from an 18-month period as a student architect in the studio of Gio Ponti. And no, his architecture did not actually influence me. His philosophy did. But there were also many others who I consider as mentors. And I was particularly lucky in my 20s. Malta hosted a number of fascinating international personalities like Basil Spence, Victor Passmore, Desmond Morris, Ernie Bradford, Nicholas Montserrat, and I was architect to all of them. So one would have to go and solve the problem of a leaking pool, which would take probably 3/4 of an hour, and then there would be a 2-hour personal masterclass listening to these extraordinary people. And at that age, you assimilate. So I got an overlay, an intellectual overlay, for which I remain eternally grateful.
So you start to build this into your work. Some of your earlier works feel maybe not as brightly coloured as this. Tell us about the evolution of colour and how that came into your work, the way you play and the way you practice.
Well, apart from the regionalist early period, I didn't realise that, in fact, the most important thing about architecture is to touch one's soul. I think Corbusier had once said, you use concrete, you use wood, and you build a house. That is construction. You touch my heart, that is architecture. So it is extremely important because the onus on the shoulders of an architect is actually tremendous, because we actually shape the environment within which people work, people live, and a good environment can make you happy. A bad environment has negative effects. If we go back to the earliest solution, or definition rather, of architecture by the Roman architect Vitruvius, who said that architecture is about commodity, firmness, and delight, which he labeled venustas. Now, commodity, because architecture is a solution to a particular problem, so you have to make sure that you solve that problem. Firmness, well, if firmness actually implies that the damned building doesn't fall on your head, but those two qualities are actually about construction. What lifts construction to the level of architecture is this venustas, which is very difficult to actually define. But it's probably beauty, but it's not an overlay you put like butter on a bread or something. It has to be inborn from the very essence of the way one is actually creating. So, Paul Valéry in his book Eupalinos actually says there are buildings which are mute, there are buildings which speak, but above all there are buildings which sing. So I attempt, in a way, I'll use a paraphrase of C.S. Lewis's words. While others were building ships in their bottle, I was striving to build a lighthouse.
And that feels appropriate coming from Malta, being on an island. But I want to ask as well, you talk about a building singing there, you talk about, I guess wanting to engage with our senses. How do you do that? Can you feel, touch, taste a building?
Well, Juhani Palasma, who was a great friend of mine, the Finnish architect and author, penned a book called The Eyes of the Skin. And basically what he's saying is that you do not sense architecture only visually, but you actually sense it with all your 5 senses. And he has this wonderful quote in one of the chapters of the book where he says, when I was on the Pantheon, I had a great urge to taste the marble. It's about the combination of how the space actually influences all our senses, and that creates the atmosphere. Space remains mood manipulative, so it is essential for the architect to try and create an ambience which enhances the spirit and uplifts the soul.
My thanks to Richard England there. We'll be right back after this.
Tune in to Monocle on Culture, where we grill our panel of critics to get the inside line on the best in the world of film, music, art, literature, and more.
It's just got this synth section that kind of makes you want to swing through the saloon doors straight to the dance floor.
With industry insiders and the odd bit of reportage too, it's bound to keep the most discerning of culture vultures very well fed.
Why'd You Come In Here Looking Like That is a song that is absolutely going to make you want to put on a pair of tight jeans and go boot scooting, even if it's just in your front room.
Monocle on Culture, premiering Mondays at 2000 London time and available thereafter wherever you get your podcasts.
Finally on today's show, Natalie, you spoke to, I guess, the dynamic duo behind the fashion brand Nanushka. Tell us a little bit about them and your conversation with them on stage at the Quality of Life conference.
So interestingly, Peter and Sandra, the couple behind Nanushka, were the first people I interviewed when I started at Monocle. So it was incredible to have them back 2.5 years later to talk about the evolution of the brand. They built a global business out of Budapest, and we spoke about what it's like to build a business of that caliber based in Budapest, the Made in Hungary label, and also how they've been evolving their business. They've invested in new brands both in Hungary and in Italy, and they are just coming from New York, where they hosted a really successful show at New York Fashion Week and opened a new shop. So we also speak a little bit about physical retail, the value of craft, a really interesting multi-dimensional conversation.
Brilliant. Let's hear from Sandra and Peter of Nanushka now.
I grew up surrounded by clothes because my mom set up a small children's wear business in the early 70s in Hungary, back then in communist Hungary. At a very early age, I decided that I want to work in fashion. So then I went to London to study fashion design, and then right after college, I designed my first collection, because I decided that I do not want to work at a larger fashion house, but I really wanted to create my own label. I went back to Budapest. That's when Nanushka was born, like almost 20 years ago now.
It's so interesting that you say you went back to Budapest, especially back then when I think anyone within the fashion industry would have probably laughed if they said, you're not in Milan, you're not in Paris, there's no way you will be able to set this up and then also grow an international presence. What have been the benefits of having Budapest as your base and then building from there?
What it means to be based out of Budapest as a creative entrepreneur. Budapest is very well connected in the sense that it's pretty close to the Western capitals and Western Europe, also culturally, but also like logistically. It's easy to access all kind of the Western markets. At the same time, it gives you a different pace of life, so to say. And of course, in terms of fashion talent, a city like Budapest didn't have a lot when we started out. I joined her in 2016, and we had to learn everything through experience, through trial and error. Well, mostly error, but that was certainly an experience, but it's been an incredible ride ever since, and we now have a strong team also based out of Budapest, but also based in London, a pretty international management team and pretty international team. We also managed to educate and grow and nurture a pretty big pool of local talent. There was not really any other fashion company in Hungary before, so we were the first one. I hope that it will also lay the foundation of future creative enterprises and creative ventures in Hungary.
And there's also the proximity to great manufacturing. Is that something that you want to emphasize, the Made in Hungary label and the producers within Hungary that you work with?
The fact that a lot of luxury houses have been manufacturing in Hungary and around Hungary for a long period of time helped us to scale the business at the early days. And on the other hand, further down the road, we were growing very, very fast, and we had some issues in scaling up the supply chain and production part, because Hungary is, of course, not the size of a country like Turkey, for instance, where you have huge production conglomerates. Hungary is much smaller, but at the same time, it has very high quality manufacturing. So it was good to rely on.
Regarding manufacturing, maybe I just give a little bit about like my design approach, so then I could talk about how I choose handicraft techniques, which we use in Hungary. I'm really into mixing distant cultural references. Actually, Budapest was always like an intersection of East and West. The Ottoman influence as well, through the Habsburg, and the Soviet era had some influence. And I'm just really interested in like mixing or merging innovative design with like traditional craftsmanship. We gathered a group of women in like the rural Hungarian countryside. They were always like teaching them a new skill, whatever, like whether it's like ceramic buttons or like hand crochet bags. And now they are making like tableware for our cafes. They are all these like this element of human touch they are giving to our garments and products.
Which is very rare, especially when you're working within the contemporary market and you're offering very competitive luxury price points. The fashion market is becoming very saturated and as a result also in many cases very homogeneous, right? And what it seems that you are doing is breaking the rules in very different ways, whether it is your investment in craft, the way that you're approaching retail as well. Maybe we can start with your retail shops, because as a young business, right now most brands are doubling down on digital, and you've opened very beautifully designed shops, first in Budapest, then London, across the US. Tell us why that has been important for the business.
Fasten designed our London and New York stores, and they are hospitality designers. And one of the reasons why we as a fashion brand went to a hospitality design studio and architecture practice was actually the exact reason of how we can transform an otherwise boring, a little bit alienating retail experience into something much more hospitable, something much more memorable, and something that we also would like to experience ourselves. So using hospitality design aspects and then approach like F&B or hospitality approach was really crucial for us when we designed our retail stores. We have cafes in the store. Now we are working on opening our London mini hotel, which is a hotel with one room. It's not really a hotel, London apartment above the store that all our customers will be accessible to the public. We are constantly thinking about what kind of human elements and hospitality elements you can bring into a retail experience that can differentiate yourself. Because the issue that you mentioned now is that the whole fashion industry is becoming so homogeneous, and new product ideas, innovations can be copied in weeks. It's absolutely crazy. If you want to differentiate your brand beyond the actual products, you have to be thinking about the experiences, because that's one way that this is something that's much more difficult to copy or to actually, replicate.
It's such an exciting concept. Why is it something that you wanted to introduce to your London boutique, and why is hospitality so important?
I think one of the key pillars of a successful strategy is customer loyalty and building long-term customer relationships. To get there, you need to build a trust and a special experience. And I think one way is to involve customers and bring them into your universe. And what can you do beyond the product? Because just wearing the product is not really your whole universe. And Sandra, I think, is not just an incredible designer, but she's also a great curator, how she curates a lifestyle around Nanushka. What is the Nanushka cosmos? That's how we call it. So bringing the customers into that cosmos is a really important gateway for us to build that customer loyalty and to also find a language to tell more about what Nanushka is, what we stand for, how we think about the quality of life.
My thanks to Sandra and Peter, the duo behind Nanushka. And that's all for today's show from the Monocle Quality of Life Conference recap on the rooftop of the Peninsula Hotel in Istanbul. Natalie Theodosi, thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you very much.
And for more design stories, listen to our 5-minute midweek bonus show, Monocle on Design Extra, which airs on Thursdays. And if you enjoy print, then do pick up a copy of Monocle magazine as well. It's on all good newsstands now. Today's episode was produced and edited by Maylee Evans. I'm Nick Manise.
I'm Natalie Theodosi.
Thanks for listening.